Hi.
Hello.
Okay, we're recording.
Okay. Let me pull up my questions. Let's see.
Thank you for doing this again. Happy to redo questions or happy to uh, just move forward. I
Okay.
just, why did I request this? Because for some reason it's 9 in the morning and I'm not thinking to myself, oh, this is for posterity. And also, I don't want to speak casually as I can. And I want to make sure that that I articulate better than I think I did in the first round.
Okay.
So not about your questions. It's about me.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. Yeah, so I'll probably, since we have 30 minutes, I'll probably ask about half. Um,
Okay.
so let's see. At what point did you start to merge your passion for theater with your passion for human rights?
Did I answer that one before?
Yes.
Yes, I did. Um, I think I merged them when I was in college. I attended Stanford University and it was 1968, which was during the Vietnam War. And I was adamantly anti-US involvement in that war. At first, I took my theater classes and did plays and marched in the afternoon and evening. And then I realized that many of my fellow students and colleagues were beginning to use political theater as a way to talk about the war. We stood around the fountain in the main quad memorial fountain and took red food coloring and dropped it into the water to protest the bombings in Cambodia and other acts of political theater, very overtly political theater were being done. So I became interested in what is political theater. I was familiar with Brecht plays, and I started thinking about, well, that's political theater. And then I read Mao's Little Red Book, where he says all theater is political. It either reinforces or challenges the status quo. And I thought, well, then that's political theater. So the notion of what is political theater became um, important to me. And I saw performances in the Bay Area, San Francisco, the Bay Area, by the San Francisco Mime Troupe, where they would do a kind of commedia style, very overt political theater, which was quite popular at the time. So I began to wrestle in those years with this very complicated question about how theater functions in society. And it's not there's no simple answer to that. Uh, each time period maybe thinks about theater in its own different ways. And the political climate makes a big difference. One of the things I was talking to my husband about just recently, I think it had to do with the present administration's concern about a comic like Jimmy Kimmel speaking certain things in a humorous way in the public sphere, and um, that should be um, monitored. And I remembered artists visiting from different countries not that many years ago, and my telling them, And these are artists from countries where people have been imprisoned or killed for saying certain things on stage in front of a public in a more repressive, censored context. I remember telling them, isn't it great here where Deaf Poetry Jam on Broadway, the artist can say in a poem that they thought that George Bush brought down the Twin Towers. It was a part of a poem that was read on in the show Deaf Poetry Jam on Broadway. And I thought to myself, that would not happen now, which at the time the artist said, well, don't they care what you say on stage? And I said, no, apparently they don't. That's one of the beauties of the United States. Nobody cares what we say on stage. We can say anything. But that's not true now. And maybe it wasn't always true. Maybe there was a moment where that was possible. So this whole question is very complicated. There's no easy answer to theater as a political gesture. Ancient Greek theater, Shakespeare's theater, um, certainly Brecht's theater. It's a dynamic. But I was very, very relieved when I found that in Theater Without Borders, I there were other colleagues who were as interested in that intersection as I was.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. What need did you see in the world that propelled you to start Theater Without Borders?
Um, the need that I saw and felt personally was isolation. We had in 2003, 2004, I had come back from several projects and directing and workshop uh, assignments in East Africa. So that was Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda slash Burundi. Um, and then the United States was at war in Iraq. And suddenly we were ostracized. There were protests around the world against the United States taking action in Iraq, but we did. And so the tension, political tension, um, became very, very restrictive. And my colleagues and I decided that we wanted to stay in contact with our colleagues for the benefit of both of us, all of us. We needed not to feel so isolated. We wanted to show that we were human beings beyond our government actions. We wanted to stay in contact with colleagues and friends that we had made over the years before the war started. And and so we created this mechanism to offer ourselves as present. If you write us, we will respond. If you reach out, we are here. And much to our delight and surprise, people did reach out. And we learned that they were as interested in being connected with us as we were in being connected with them.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. And was there any individual or organization that seemed to be against the mission that you had to connect people and prevent isolation?
An interesting question. I think there was any institution that reached out in any way to stop us from doing that. But our choice was to do it as grassroots volunteers. maybe that choice made it possible for us to operate under the radar, as they say, or in a low profile way. We weren't funded by anybody. We had no grants. There was no institution behind us. We weren't putting any other organization in a public view as supporting us. We were just individuals at the beginning of the time when the internet was coming into fruition. So it was 2003, 2004. So the whole idea of setting up a website and wondering if people on the other side of the planet would find it and send an info at theaterwithoutborders.com inquiry was completely unpredictable. We had no idea whether that would function. In the United States, there's a big breakdown, and I think this is still true, between institutions, even nonprofit institutions, for-profit institutions, nonprofit institutions, and a sewing circle at the local library, a book club at somebody's house. Grassroots volunteer organizations like Theater Without Borders, just like a book club at the local library, are really, we have the right to set those up. Those are just us. We're not, we're not, we don't need permission from anyone to have a grassroots volunteer little gathering group. And so we didn't ask for permission, and we we took advantage of the fact that we could act as a group of individuals. I think you see that all over today in a highly politicized time. You see people gathering as groups of individuals, but in many circumstances, is my observation, as they go for funding or as they begin to align themselves with other institutions, then questions start being asked about the institutional support. But if those groups remain grassroots, what can you say? It's not a thing. It's just a group of people who get together occasionally at the library. And that is basically what we were. We were interested in person to person, artist to artist dialogue. We had that was our goal, to just stay in contact with our friends and colleagues, and to do it through our mechanism of theater. So the miraculous thing to me is that we built a website, thanks to Katrine. We called it Theater Without Borders, and that little phrase somehow leapt into onto the computer terminals of people across the world.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And one more question for you. Um, were there any moments where you saw the work you were doing with Theater Without Borders have a direct impact on people's lives?
Oh gosh, I mean, I don't, I've never interviewed people and said, how did this impact your life? Um, so I can't say definitively in that sense, um, from that perspective of authority. Um, but it changed my life. And I think it did, in my observation, change the lives of most of the people who participated, because it opened doors. We all we all um, have expectations and predictions about what's possible for us. And to suddenly be on Zooms, and of course, Zoom was new too, but suddenly to find ourselves having conversations with people in other countries, often in other countries where our own government was in conflict or their government was in conflict with someone else. And then that third person on the call was they were in some kind of conflict and they were able to talk to each other. I witnessed many encounters where people who, under any other circumstance, would not be able to be communicating with each other, communicate with each other. And it's theater, you know, we believe that human to human presence is has a power, has an extraordinary power. I believe it. That's how theater works. So I know that it works in the storytelling of theater and in the event of theater. I know how powerful it is. In my own life, I know how powerful it is. And I saw so many eyes open. So many times artists would come to the United States and breathe freely outside of outside of pressures from their own countries and their own cultures. And so many times I walked into places and felt like a whole world opening up. So I think from the on that level of experience, on meeting people across borders, meeting people who you thought there's too much of a frontier between us, and then realizing, no, you can sit and have coffee. I remember very distinctly, here's a personal anecdote. I remember I'm Jewish American. I remember being at the Theater and Peace Building event at Brandeis, and one of the guests was a poet, a Palestinian Israeli poet named Ida Nasrallah. And at one point, Ida and I just decided we would have a meal together. So we went into the the dining area was big, but there was an area where you could kind of have a little private room. So the two of us said, well, let's just take our trays and we'll go there. So we'd been meeting together for a couple of days, and some of it was facilitated, and some of it was just, you know, bopping around a conference and bumping into people as you do. But this was Ida and I deciding we were going to sit and talk. And I think maybe she asked me to come sit with her. That's Ida. And at some point, I just remember both of us sobbing and holding hands and saying how sorry we both were about the circumstance uh, for her, for Palestinians, for Israelis, for what seems to be such an intractable, tragic situation to this day. And um, we're still friends. We still communicate. I visited her at her home. Um, I just don't know how events like that could take place. I think there have been multiple examples of that.
Right. Yes, of course. That's really special. Yeah, well, if you have anything else to add,
You have more time. You can ask me 10 minutes more.
okay. Um, well, I guess how has your work with political theater kind of continued as you started Theater Without Borders?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Are you interested in that kind of work, Lucian, yourself?
Yeah, not exactly in the theater sense, but I think that my work kind of involves um, more casual representation of people in the queer community through filmmaking,
Mm,
which is in itself political, if not kind of overtly challenging the status quo more as, I mean, it is, just not, I don't know how to explain it,
mhm.
but it's kind of like more of, hey, we exist, and this is like the work that I'm making to represent that, versus directly challenging, and opposing something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, didactic, there's didactic theater where you're literally saying, I want, here's a here's a hypothesis, you should believe it. But certainly, I think, I think, um, representation, a certain, and especially of voices that have not been represented or sufficiently represented or represented in all diversity, um, is very political because just to the roots of the word polis, it's about the polis, the people, the society. It's not political. I think, in a contentious time like we live in, political means Democratic, Republican, progressive, conservative. But that's so narrow. The polis is just the people. And and if you tell the story of Medea, who was a barbarian and came from this other island and wasn't Greek, and you tell her story on stage in an ancient Greek play, that was representation. That was big to represent Medea on stage and one of her people as a central character. The Trojan women, that there were plays where the lead characters are the Trojan women, not the Greeks, but it's a Greek play. And they fought a war with Troy. So representing is highly powerful in communicating with the polis about what is the polis, who are we. So I try to be precise in a context where most of us don't try to be precise. We're more experiential, we're more subjective, we're more passionate, but precision too has value. And trying to be precise about politics and theater and just place them at an intersection. What if we think about an artist like yourself who is thinking about the larger social political context? And I want to make a movie. We saw Dazed and Confused the other day. I think it's just sort of it's a Richard Linklater slacker film about teenagers in Texas in the 70s, 80s, 70s, 80s, 1970s, 80s. In a weird sense, it's representing a community and sharing the experience of that community with a larger social polis. So is that political? Well, kind of. Yes. It's a conversation that we're having. Art is a way to have a conversation about the nature of the polis. So I kind of Theater Without Borders was a part of a transition that I made when I was at Bennington. Excuse me. And I was 50 and I read Peter Brooks' The Conference of the Birds about his travel to Africa. And um, he and his company traveled to Africa in search of a kind of universal theater. And I was teaching a class, which I acknowledged was not very well informed on my part because I'd never done study in world theater. Um, and I um, I began to see that American theater, which had dominated my view and my interest in how American theater functioned, and how American society represented itself, I became very interested in other countries and how their expression of performance existed. And it led to other opportunities for me. Yes, it changed. It that that beginning at Bennington led to a series of transformative events in my life as I began to be more drawn into um, uh, international work. And my work with um, Sundance, with the Sundance Theater Institute, where I was um, co-designing and co-creating their international theater exchanges in East Africa and then the Middle East, North Africa, was political in the sense that um, my understanding and my boss's, Philip Himberg's understanding of what American artists needed was that we were isolated, that we had isolated ourselves from world theater traditions. In the 60s, there were groups like Mabu Mines and um, Wooster Group and many others where artists traveled and were deeply and profoundly influenced by other cultures and brought that inspiration back to the United States and developed remarkable American companies. So we felt strongly that we had become too enclosed, and it was harmful to us. We as Americans needed fresh air. We needed to open our minds to other possibilities, not just through a book reading Henrik Ibsen plays, but to performance in cultures that we weren't easily accessing. That's is that political? It's an understanding that the theater, that art has a is a conversation so much larger than national boundaries. Is that political to say that? To enter into other countries and to cross their boundaries, their frontiers, and to start to experience their cultures and their histories, uh, and people there, daily life. Is that political? It's crossing boundaries. Did I feel that it was a um, political action in that general sense of um, belief that theater is a world culture, that we could both support American theater, that I could be an American, feel that deeply, uh, and yet want to be a global citizen and artist, theater artist, participating in what this performance mechanism has been over the centuries and will be in the future for all of us on the earth. Was that political? To make sure that voices that were not being spoken through the megaphone of the United States, because the United States holds a very strong megaphone. We get a lot of attention. Our actions take a lot of attention. Our media focuses in. We're a big country. There's a lot to say about us. To put the spotlight on other countries and the artists from other countries, is that political? I'm not being coy. I'm really, I really wrestle with. I don't want to be too reductive in naming uh, something when we don't all know what we mean by using that word.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you tell me a little more about your work with the Sundance Festival?
Yeah, so Sundance always had a theater program. It's something that a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't know because it's so famous as a film festival. Um, but Robert Redford, the late Robert Redford, did theater when he was young, and he loved it. And he all right from the beginning in the 1980s when Sundance started, he had a theater program. In the early days, it was they performed musicals. I've been to the resort many times, and so there's a beautiful theater up the hill at the Sundance Resort, and it used to be they would, do shows, and they had a company, and then they did kids theater. So it went through various incarnations, but by the time I met Philip Himberg, who was the director of the theater program, Philip was modeling. I think this started with Ken Brecker actually, but Sundance was modeling a lab, a theater lab, just like they have a film lab. So they have film labs every summer where you should apply, where you can either apply as a screenwriter or you apply as a director, and they bring you to the resort. It's so, 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 so beautiful. Those mountains are so beautiful. The food's delicious. The air is so clean. And you be in beautiful nature for a few weeks in the summer. You are interacting with highest level professionals in your area. And then you go home inspired with new friends, etc. It's like art camp, the best kind of art camp. And this would also happen for the theater. There would be workshops every summer, and plays would be developed. And when I joined, um, there were a couple of international guests who were coming in, and the same gentleman who I met on the hills of Bennington, Philip Arnault, um, uh, he um, was bringing individual international artists to Sundance so that they could observe the Sundance lab process. Because the whole idea of developing plays is a distinctly American thing. Sidebar. Many other countries do not develop plays. Playwrights sit, they write them. When they're done, they hand them to the artistic director and they get produced. But in America, we develop plays. And there's this whole, as Mauricio Mpoto from Tanzania said, called it the space in between. Idea, he said, it goes, idea, performance, Sundance, because it's the space in between from the idea to the performance. And so the proposal that Philip and I worked out was that we would actually do workshops in East Africa. We would bring East African artists to the resort, and this space in between would become viscerally, experientially available to the international artists. And at the same time, people would meet each other, they would have meals all day long, they'd go on hikes together, they would work on some of each other's projects, there would be other sessions. So um, I had many moments when I watched American artists just stunned and overwhelmed to realize the quality and the intelligence and the capacity of their international colleagues. They just didn't know them because they'd never met any. So, very, very powerful to see American artists impacted by that. Hey, Nix. And just to finish, and then I would co-produce and design. We would go to those countries for 2 to 3 weeks, and we would um, do workshops in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, or um, Kampala, Uganda, or Nairobi, Kenya, uh, or Zanzibar, Tanzania. and we would just be together um, for several weeks doing that space in between play development.
Right. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Wonderful experience. Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Alas, it's gone now as things come and go. The theater program was closed in 2019. It was pretty much a casualty of a new administration and also the COVID cutbacks. Very
Right.
sad. So Sundance is now a thriving film festival, but it's still a phenomenal place with great, great artists. So I hope you end up there.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Thank you so much.
You should. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
answering questions again.
Okay. Thank you, Lucian.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Hey, you may depart.
Bye, Nix.
Okay, bye now.
Hi.
Hey, Nix. How are you?
Hi. Hey. Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm
Okay.
good.
Uh,
Thank you so much for doing this.
should I just, Mhm. Okay, just to say before yes, of course, of course. I think my internet connection is,
Yeah,
I,
that's all right. We'll endure.
okay, sorry, can you hear me?
I can. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can. I
Okay,
can.
sorry,
Yes.
my internet connection's acting up a lot today. I don't know
Yeah.
what's the issue there.
It happens.
Okay. Um, okay, so we might have some technical difficulties. Do you want me to still start and we'll just see how it goes?
Sounds good.
Or actually, here, I'll type it in the chat just because that might be easier.
Oh, okay. Great. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Okay. Hi, sorry.
Hey, no worries.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, I don't know if the internet might be working better here. Would you,
yeah.
I'm still happy to go on right now and
Okay,
continue to the
good.
meeting
Yeah,
if it
let's do
works
it.
with you. Okay, perfect. Just because I'm a bit short on time, I'll just try to
Yeah,
move it over a bit quickly because I have the meeting with Chantal in a bit.
yeah,
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that.
no worries.
Um, Here's my first question was just start at the beginning. What, when you first started thinking or considering the idea for an international theater project or organization, what were your initial motivations? How did you first arrive at that idea? And yeah, how kind of just how did that setting look like?
Yeah. Um, I traveled a little bit when I was a young person. My father brought the family to Mexico. We had a trip to Mexico City that I remember very well when I was 12, maybe. But our family didn't travel internationally a lot. Um, uh, that was a very memorable trip. So when I got to college, I did a 6 months of study in France, and then at a school in Tours, from which was my university's campus abroad. And so I was not a I when I was there, we traveled through Europe, but I was not a world traveler by any means. I was always curious, but my interest for most of my early professional life was America. I was part of the generation that went to college. I was at Stanford University in the Bay Area between 1968 and 1972, which were the prime years of protest against the Vietnam War. And I was a protester. So, I um, in college, I was politically interested. I was interested in what was going on in the rest of the world. My grandparents came from Poland. It wasn't that I was unaware, but I was not a global traveler. So, it was actually I was very interested in because I was kind of raised uh, as a young adult in the cauldron of the Vietnam War and anti-war protests. I was um, I was very sensitive to um, uh, the role that um, America played in that context. And I wanted to make work, as did many of the artists in my generation, about our generation and about uh, what was happening in the United States. We're a very big country. We are enormously diverse, no surprise for me to tell you that. And there's a lot going on here, plenty to worry about, just just here. And so I was very interested in theater of my time, in my time. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make theater not, I didn't want to do old European dead people plays. I wanted to do contemporary, new plays talking about America today. And that was my focus for the first half of my adult career. And that's what I did. I directed and dramaturged new plays and was very involved in the whole new play development process in the United States. But I was teaching at UCLA for about 10 years, from 1990 to 2000, on the faculty. And one of my jobs was to teach new play development, graduate playwrights, graduate theater directors, graduate theater playwrights, graduate theater directors. And they were doing interesting things, and I was, very aware of the new play uh, conversation in the United States. But I felt less and less that in those years, um, the energy and dynamic was present the way it had been when I was younger and I was getting older. So I shifted. I left UCLA. I followed my fellow professor to Bennington College in Vermont. And at Bennington College, I taught a class in world theater, which I joke was a very bad class because I knew very little about world theater. I'd been specializing in American theater. But the Bennington students were wonderfully flexible, as you guys are. And so everybody went along for the ride. Like, okay, great, we'll figure it out. It was a kind of reductive class because we had a big world to cover in 7 weeks. And so we gave very short amounts of attention to each of those areas of the world that we were able to squish into those sessions. But one of the sessions was on African theater. And one of the students leaned over at one point and said, "Wouldn't it be great to go there?" And I said, "It would." And I, just a couple of weeks later, in true Bennington mystical, magical fashion, 2 weeks later, my friend, my fellow faculty friend's colleague, was wandering the hills of Bennington um, with a project in Africa. And I said, "Oh, Philip Arnaud, who began the Center for International Theater Development out of Towson University and was arguably he, along with Martha Coignet of the U.S. Center of the International Theater Institute, Philip Arnaud and Martha Coignet were the two people who were the most active and effective creating international exchange in the United States at that time, along with Ellen Stewart at La Mama. And Philip said, "Oh, okay, you want to come? Sure." And I said, "Yes, I'm going to come." Just completely spontaneous. I ended up, because the workshop leader dropped out, I ended up leading that workshop and thinking to myself, after working with, for 6 weeks, I think it was, with Kenyan, Ugandan, and Tanzanian performers. We did an actual play. We created a play. It performed at the Bagamoyo International Theater Festival in Bagamoyo, Tanzania. And I thought, this is so much more interesting. I am so much more interested now in this theater, in different kinds of theater, in the international conversation. How do I stay in it? And so I made every effort to continue to do work like I had just done, uh, and and sought that out, created grant applications for myself so that I could go back, meet more colleagues, added Rwanda to my journey and my network of communications in East Africa. And I just became impassioned by the idea that I could do this. And I also was shocked to realize how few Americans were doing it. There were less than a handful of Americans who at the time were doing traveling in East Africa and doing exchange work there. And I was stunned by that. And um, so I made every effort. I eventually got Fulbright grants to go and teach in Hong Kong and Romania and Ethiopia and Uganda. And I just couldn't stop pursuing it. And along with that, catalytic was coming back to the United States, meeting up with Eric and Deborah and Katrine and saying, "You're interested in this kind of work. I'm interested in this kind of work. Where is our community?" And that was really the beginning of a total transformation of my work from focus on the United States to a focus on the world and the relationship of the United States to that global cultural world.
Just coming back with those motivations, with those experiences, and then reaching out and speaking with the other three co-founders. I guess how did that happen? How did you either coincide or reach out to them specifically? Why them specifically? And then um, just be as ever detailed as you want. Either I don't know, because you know three different people, but how those conversations with each of them kind of look like.
Yeah, I wish I had a better memory. This is what happens if you don't write things down right away. Um, uh, but I will say that Eric N. had, why did I know him? I'm not sure. I mean, I had a substantial career in the American theater, and Eric was at the time one of America's leading uh, new voices, and he was writing about experiences in other countries, which was distinctive because a lot of people were just writing about their families or their neighborhoods, or, it was very America centric. It was American concerns. But Eric's concerns were global. That was notable. And he had written a play called Maria Quisito, which was about an infamous story where uh, a community of Tutsis were under threat from the genocide by the Hutus, and they had sought refuge in a church. And uh, at that time, um, the idea was you could take sanctuary in the church and you would be left safe. However, two nuns at that church, Catholic church, um, were Hutus, and one of them communicated with her brother that there were Tutsis in the church, and they were massacred. And this was shocking, and Eric was shocked by it. He's a he's a practicing Catholic himself. He went to Yale Divinity School. So when we were joking about his sermons, he does give sermons, but beautiful ones. But uh, he he was so struck by that contradiction. How could it be that you could be a nun in the Catholic Church, that people could come to your place for sanctuary, and that you would report them? And then they would be killed. So these two nuns were brought up for charges at the criminal court, International Criminal Court in The Hague. And Eric put on his backpack, went to the court, sat in the court sessions because he just had to be present. And he wrote an amazing, disturbing, beautiful, poetic play called Maria Quisito, which was the name of one of the nuns, and trying just to reconcile that impossible to reconcile um, events, those impossible to reconcile events. So I think it was Eric that I connected with because I'd been in East Africa. I was making outreach to Rwanda. He had been in Rwanda. I actually ended up going with him. He was teaching at Cal Arts at the time, and he brought students to Rwanda in the summer with a connection that he had made. And I went on one of those summer trips. It was extraordinarily intense experience. So we really connected over the fact that we were working in that particular area. I had known Deborah Vort from Alaska. I lived in Seattle for 5 years, and I ran a small theater there. And Deborah was running the Perseverance Theater Company in Juneau, Alaska, so just a couple hours north of Seattle. And I had visited and worked for her company multiple times, so I knew her because I'd been a director at her theater company in Juneau, Alaska. And I think Kat was new to me. She was the person who was new to me and probably through Deb and Eric. And the four of us connected and thought, why in this time are we not having more energy by American service organizations like Theater Communications Group or any other mechanisms to connect American theater artists internationally? Aren't there others of us? Question mark. Because a lot of what we did was based on questions we had. Aren't there others who want to talk about this? Shouldn't we be connected internationally? Isn't it better for us if we have these kinds of extraordinary experiences that we had just come back from? Why aren't our colleagues putting their backpacks on and going to other countries? Why aren't they? And so I think that was the genesis. And by that point, I just no longer, I felt um, a kind of passion to keep to keep going, keep traveling, expanding that circle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hey, and I guess suppose after that initial kind of talking, reaching out with those people, you went on to have first that new dramatist, just write a very casual Theaters Without Borders gathering, and then eventually you had the Future of International Exchange, the 2 day symposium. After those two events, and after being able to talk with so many people and see and find that right that this idea of international exchange resounded and really hit home with a lot of people, did your thoughts on Theater Without Borders, on what you either were going to do or you could do or wanted to do, change in any way from what you had first had?
That's a great question, Nix. It's been a very organic evolution, I think. It feels like it was organic to me. Um, I um, First of all, I I didn't know that there were so many other people um, as passionate as I was, but sometimes working in different parts of the world. So there was Katrine working in Cambodia, so Asia, very far from East Africa, and Rwanda with Eric, and then Deb, who talked to you or someone about her activities in Denmark, and also I know she was in Mexico, and so um, I began to realize that humility in the face of this big world is is a good approach, a wise approach, and my colleagues were so impressive to me. I just I didn't know their cultures in some cases. I didn't know their experiences. Diana Milosevic, the idea that she was performing, I don't know if you've seen her in the documentary. You guys, maybe when you have a free moment next week, um, watch the hour-long documentary about which I believe you can watch on that website, about the Acting Together project. Diana talks about doing theater in Belgrade, Serbia, as the war began, when the Serbians began a war that broke up the former Yugoslavia. And she's Serbian, and she had a theater company, and they were performing on the streets of Belgrade. And there were Croatians and Bosnians there, and the Serbians too. And they were militarizing. It's just so many stories that were incomprehensibly beyond my small gestures. Um, Shahid talking about going to prison and being forced into exile because of performances that he did in Pakistan under um, a regime that found his work unacceptable. There were just so many stories. Roberto Varea talking about his, oh, did you guys talk to Roberto? Did somebody talk to Roberto? Did you?
Um,
Oh, I hope you will, Nix.
I believe. Mhm.
Yeah, I hope you will. It's so worth it. He's an amazing person. So he's from Argentina, and he was describing a play that he was involved in, Fuente Ovejuna, where the when the woman in the play is raped, usually it the character talks to other characters on stage. How could you let this happen? In the production, suddenly there were multiple women standing, and they turned out to the audience and they said, "How could you let this happen to us?" And the audience got it that suddenly the conversation leapt out of, the confines of the theater directly into the experiences of Argentinians living under the dictatorship of Pinochet. And they stood up kind of in honor of those women and kind of in, acceptance that they had responsibility for them. It was just so amazing stories from my colleagues who were stepping in to be core members of this group. It was such an it was so eye-opening day after day after day. The acting together uh, project, the whole project was a crash course in a kind of um, study of the role of the artist in a society. Yes, there's the role of the artist in America. We have certain things we can and cannot do, things we say and don't say on stage. But the role of the artist in some of these other situations, wow, they were so brave and and so imaginative and so creative, just so much. So learning to balance any expectation I had about what it would mean to be part of this group and the people themselves who were part of our group. I think it was um, an enormous transformation in my own um, uh, I it was an enormous transformation. I think I volunteered to to direct, meaning maintain the website, answer the info at emails, look for more opportunities, receive inquiries and pass them along to my colleagues, which oftentimes they would take advantage of. Um, Listen to them say, we need to have this kind of conference. People like Kat, Daniel, David, um, Diana, Shahid, these folks are, Roberto, it's just so, it was such an honor, honestly, to find myself, to think that there's something I can do to help keep this group going. And in many ways,
Mhm.
that's sort of a volunteer thing I decided to do to teach myself more. Like, what is the international theater world? How can you get grants? Who are the people in this network? Can we connect the United States to the world again? Because during our time when we first began it, the United States was many, many, many people said to me, particularly in Europe, because there's so many festivals and conferences in Europe, but in other parts of the world too. There's festivals everywhere. Bogota had a huge, 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 huge theater festival that Americans were not participating. They weren't present, which was sort of a shocking thing to think about. And would be, I would not be surprised if that's what's going to happen again for a while. There's going to be a big retreat. And I hope that that retreat is just temporary, ebb and flow, ebb, and then it'll come back flowing again soon.
Of course. Um, is in those early years, as you saw, as right, the organization was having a lot of success, and you're having those burgeoning people sharing experiences and everything. What were some of the initial challenges that you encountered at that time?
Um, just getting it started. Well, I think trying to, I would say Philip Arnault really encouraged me personally in conversation to stay grassroots and all volunteer. Was he protecting his own funding sources for his Center for International Theater Development? Maybe. But he also, I think, very wisely said, you don't want to spend your time writing grants, trying to, do board meetings, creating balance sheets. Administration is a full-time job for any organization, nonprofit or for-profit. And I I decided there was great wisdom in his suggestion. One, we wanted to have professional careers. All of us ran theaters or were working in theaters or had jobs, and none of us wanted to just give up everything we were doing to focus on Theater Without Borders. We wanted to do both. Theater Without Borders was our clubhouse, our hobby clubhouse, and we had professional careers. So if we stayed grassroots and volunteer, we could do that because we wouldn't be obligated to all that administration. I didn't want to be obligated to all that administration. That came at some cost. That was challenging, very challenging at times. You know, did everybody have to kick in $20 a week or $40 a year, or who was going to pay for the website? You know, so there are always expenses, and there's always a desire for organization, and there's times where you feel like you're herding cats, because people are moving and have ideas, and um, but I think they were really trying to figure out how we fit in an American context. Uh, would it be run by Americans was often a question. Why is it dominantly us? And then, the response to that might be, well, it's hard to do Zooms with an international team. Uh, it's more work. Is it easier? We have certain capacities here. We have certain access and information here. Um, but is that a good balance? There were lots of questions about, there were always questions about one choice versus the other choice. But I think looking back, there was a wisdom there. We stayed free in many ways. We were free from administration. We were free from bosses telling us what to do, because if you have donors and you have funders, you have obligations to them. We never had that, or seldom had that. Um, we were free to be principled above all. Principle above all. And that's freedom to be able to stand by your principles because you don't have all these other compromising obligations. We were free to come and go as participants. So and so could participate, and then if they got a job, they could go away and do something else and then come back. Uh, we were able to freely invite people and just say, it's the hospitality table. This is where Eric's Yoda mentorship came in. He wanted us to be, I don't know if he wanted us to be, but he would speak the words of kind of Catholic workers, which, is just hospitality, open table. Daniel would speak about the open table. Eric would talk about hospitality and conversation. Come to my house. Elsa would talk about guest in house, God in house. And so these sort of highfalutin principles of hospitality, generosity, openness, we got to practice them. It wasn't always perfect, didn't always balance out exactly that way, but we were practicing it, and to an extraordinary degree, it succeeded. So I don't want to overstate our successes compared to our challenges, but I really do think it was a phenomenon. The 20 years were phenomenal and a phenomenon that surprised all of us by its power. And I still think to this day that Doctors Without Borders, in their invention of a humanitarian organization across all borders, including the political ones, including military. If you're injured in a conflict, Doctors Without Borders treats you. They don't care which uniform you're wearing. This notion was so powerful that when we put out the title, Theater Without Borders, somebody in Qom, Iran, understood what that meant. They knew because it had a kind of power of meaning in homage, as philosophers without borders, teachers without borders, physicians without borders. There's a million without borders, and we're the theater without borders. But it's because it's a really powerful idea, and people all around the world seem to be interested in it. They wanted that welcome, and Americans aren't all that welcoming. I don't know if Katrine mentioned this, but early on, we set up a hospitality center at New Dramatists. Actually, it was so good that she brought that up. So many things we've forgotten, but we want to remember. We set up a hospitality center. We made a deal with New Dramatists that when an artist arrived in New York City, if they knew this from our website, they could go to New Dramatists, sit in the lounge, have a cup of coffee, take a play off the shelf, and read it, and feel like you are welcome here. And those people who lived in New York volunteered to take an artist out to coffee. So if an artist said, I'm coming to New York City, I don't really know anybody, I could write to Katrine and David and Jessica and say, would you take them out to coffee? Just so that we would be welcoming instead of the way America treats most guests, except during the World Cup, I guess, which is, good luck, hey, hi, good, not even the hey, hi. So in Europe, when an artist arrives, people are so gracious. There's such ceremony for a guest artist. And in the United States, we knew there's nothing, zero zip. And we wanted to be the contrast to that. We wanted to be personally welcoming. Jessica put people up in her home. If they needed a place to stay, her kids were grown, she had extra bedrooms. I mean, to that degree, we wanted to be a welcome table. That's what Daniel called it, the welcome table. Crazy.
Um, yes, going further into the story of Teachers Without Borders, as you started participating in more events and collaborations with people, I guess I want to ask, for example, the Trick Plug Company and the Revolutions International Theatre Festival and I think there were biannual symposiums they had for a bit. How did that relationship kind of emerge? And then how did you see it progressing until eventually, like with COVID, it had to end?
I know that was so sad. That's a great question for Daniel, if you can make him respond to you. maybe write him an email and just say, Daniel, we're going to wrap this up this coming week. We would love to have you be part of this conversation. So if you can spare me 30 minutes this week, and if not, you're probably not gonna, we're not gonna have your interview in the first round here or ever, and see if you can get him to join in. But Daniel had a lot to do with that. I think who was my contact there? Did I meet Elsa through Julie? I think that's so interesting. You know, there was a Bennington student doing an FWT, and she really wanted to do, early on, she really wanted to do production. I reached out to Julie and to Elsa. I think it was Julie was my main contact first, Julie Hendren, and asked if this FWT could come to Albuquerque and be a production assistant on their festival that summer. And they said, sure. And so just like, go, go to Albuquerque. Um, and that was a good experience. And we stayed in a lot of contact. And then Daniel, so some of the you know, I'm interested in climate. Um, Jessica was interested in theater and social engagement, uh, as is David, as is Daniel. Kat was interested in theater and human rights. So we actually had little sub areas of intersections that we were interested in exploring. Daniel and Jessica and David were very interested in theater and social engagement. And by that, I think you'd be looking at community based theater, education based theater. So I think it was primarily Daniel and David who helped create the content for the conference when Tricklock Revolutions invited Theater Without Borders to actually do a mini conference. And Daniel was living, this might be the connection. Daniel was living in Santa Fe at the time. He was teaching at there's an American Indian Art Institute there in Santa Fe, and he was teaching there. Santa Fe? Albuquerque. Albuquerque. So he was living there or teaching there. And so that might have also been a connective point. And he helped create it. And it's very, I don't know how much you know about the New Mexico communities. Fascinating. Fascinating because there's like sedimentary rock, there's indigenous communities that go back centuries, and then our newer arrivals or changing communities. So the pueblos are not just static by any means. There's a whole dynamic in the indigenous history, and from the Spanish um, uh, arrival in New Mexico, there's this whole sedimentary rock, like historical layering of the arrival of Spanish speaking communities. So it's it's so dense. It's unbelievably dense and rich as historical and cultural. I mean, these groups interweave and layer and debate, and it's so complex. And the state itself is one of the has areas that are some of the poorest and most uh, and have some of the largest drug problems in the United States. And there's Santa Fe, which is like the greatest congregation of just ridiculous wealth, you know, in the United States. So it's the dynamics in New Mexico are just wild. And Tricklock was both interested in the International Festival of Revolutions every year, where because both Julie and Elsa had traveled to Eastern Europe and were very familiar with that theater, but they were also bringing people from Uganda, they were bringing people from just everywhere in the world. And um, the the conferences we did were largely, to my memory, about the communities that had less resources, but this rich, complex cultural history, and were wrestling between, because I just talked about the indigenous and the Spanish speaking communities, but then there's the white people too. And so those arrivals also are multi-layered and complex. And the dynamic is not always easy. I don't know if Elsa mentioned that, but it can be, there's a lot of constant mm, shuffling and occasional, sharp elbows. So they were really wanting the Theater Without Borders perspective, which included, I mentioned earlier, Iman Aoun from Ramallah. So very interesting. And I remember this. We brought some international artists to the conference with the idea that sometimes it's a breath of fresh air to realize that things are happening outside of your context. You feel like, oh, this is such a pressure cooker, but then you realize, oh, I'm not alone. This kind of conflict is happening somewhere else. So Iman got a grant to come to the United States, and she specifically asked for that grant. I think it came out of CEC Arts Linked to be assigned to a reservation community because she feels very strongly that Palestinians are being basically the metaphor that makes most sense to her is the reservation system. She feels that Palestinians are being pushed into reservations where the land is not good, the water is not good, and they're just being pushed. You live here and we get the rest of this, just like in the United States. That's what happened with the Native Americans. So she was based at this uh, reservation, and she participated. And I think it was really interesting for people to compare those experiences. That there are actual reservations in New Mexico, and there's certainly indigenous people who feel they're being pushed around. And there's Iman, and she's making theater about it. And how do they make theater about it? And who listens, and how do you make sure somebody's listening? And are you doing it for your community? Are you doing it for your community? Who are you doing it for? Where do you, anyway, all those questions. So it was very powerful, I think, and complex, and and um, the and being outsiders coming in, talking to a very deeply rooted community that had passions. I think it was not always easy, but very interesting. And we decided to do it again the next year. And then we were hoping for more, but alas, no.
Um, Apart from the obviously the Revolutions International Festival, I believe that throughout its history, Theatre Without Borders has also had an increased focus and on parts of its network attention on the climate issue. I know the connections there with Chantal, and then there's climate change theater action and theater in the age of climate change. And I feel like as it's progressed, it's gotten more involved in this question of climate change and climate activism. So I guess I want to ask, how did that initially begin within Theatre Without Borders, and how do you see the, I guess, climate question, to call it, relate to the international mission of the organization specifically?
Yeah, that's another great question. So, I they historically to me, and I'm trying to remember when it is, somewhere there's documentation, but I think it was 2017. One of our projects was Theater Without Borders projects was working with On the Move, the European Cultural Mobility website, on-the-move.org. And that cultural mobility website is funded by the European Union. They're well endowed. They're way beyond us. In fact, I actually went to Brussels, met with them, and was like, we're the mini American version of you. Um, uh, and Marie Lesourd is based in Paris, and she is the head of the director of onthemove.org. And when I met Marie, she's a lovely, lovely person, and they have all of the European Union arts organizations and residencies share information about their workshops, their activities through On the Move. So she knows everybody, and they have a general assembly when they convene everybody every year in a different European city. And she pointed out to us that they had funding guides for travel between. So, of course, everybody who wants to work internationally needs money because you have to get a plane ticket or a hotel room or pay for some food. So everybody's always looking for money to do that. And On the Move created these wonderful funding guides. You can go on their website and click on funding guides, and there will be cultural mobility with Africa, cultural mobility with Asia, cultural mobility in Europe, cultural mobility in Latin America and South America, cultural mobility with, and there was none for the United States. So perfect. So perfect. And so Marie said, it would be nice to create one. And now we were like, yes, we'll do anything. We're nuts. We'll do it. We reached out to Frank Henchker at CUNY, the Siegel Center, Graduate Center, CUNY in New York City, and asked Frank if he would work with us to help create a cultural mobility funding guide for the US. So the completed document is living on their website now. Yay. And it gives you a list of all the funders that can give you money to travel from anywhere to the United States or from the United States to most places. And it's fantastic. It exists now. And in 2017, we had a launch at the at CUNY. They had a 400-seat theater, and all sorts of people showed up, and we talked about the funding guide and other things. And at the time, during that conference, Frank and Marie and I agreed that there would be the main conference, and then we would have these little sidebar conversations about specialty topics. And I asked for one on climate. And in those days, if you wanted to do a conversation about climate and theater, 3 people would show up. And I'm not joking. Nobody would show up. It's insane. So I asked for 2 people to lead that breakout session. And I asked Chantal and I asked Elizabeth Dowd, 2 people who I knew were interested in climate. And I said, could you guys be the leaders of the breakout session? I knew they would be at the event, and would they be the leaders of the breakout session? And they said yes. And instead of 3 people, 11 people showed up. I went and sat in the room with them, and I thought, you know what? I'm getting on in age. My granddaughter is freaked out about the planet. I'm going to focus on this from now on. This will be my thing. I don't know anything about it. I don't know the science, but I'm going to do it. And that led to a succession of things that Chantal and Elizabeth and I, and then eventually Chantal, Elizabeth, and Elsa and I created. Other gatherings the climate change uh, theater in the time of climate change at a Howl Round. We had a big gathering of 30 artists funded by Howl Round in Boston at Emerson College. We had other meetings. We went to Florida at Marjorie Stone Douglas Nature Center outside of Miami and had a group of theater artists. We just thought we're going to build it kind of like we connected with Una Chowdhury at NYU, her Climate Lens project. We connected with Sarah Sunday and her climate work. We had instigated with Caridad Svich and Chantal the climate change theater action. We just started like, let's do it. Pop-ups everywhere. Let's just look for things we can do to keep some momentum going of a conversation about this. Not to be didactic, like save the planet, damn you, which of course is what we want to say, but we don't say that. We say, that performance can be beautiful, can be exquisite. All we ask is that as more and more artists are aware that the planet that we live on is changing, that some of the ways we've talked about nature in the past may not be as relevant now or in the future, and that we have stories to tell. There was an event in New York City, and I don't remember the year, and but Chantal will know, where we met at Puerto Rican Traveling Theater's home base, and it was a presentation of some of the climate change theater action plays. And Gavin Schmidt, who's very, very famous in the climate change science community, worked at NASA, et cetera, still a leader, still being introduced all the time to speak about the climate dilemma. And he was present. Chantal had made connections with him. She's very connected with science and knows the science, which I don't. And he got up on stage and he said to the assembly, he said, I could talk to you for 45 minutes about the scientific information, but I'm not gonna. I'm going to say in 5 minutes what I need to tell you. You are the artists. We need you. You need to tell this story of what's happening. Thank you. And he sat down. And I never forget that. I think that is the mission. The science people can't tell this story. They're not storytellers. Theater people are storytellers. We don't have to tell it in any particular way. It's not to say what you have to say. It's just there's something happening. And the scientists need artists to talk about it somehow, to bring it into the public arena somehow, as much as possible. You can do it because you're scared. You can do it because you're optimistic. You can do it because you are in love with a tree. You can do it any way you want. You can do it with music. You can do it with dance. You can do it in a standard text-based play, but do it. If you're thinking about it, bring it into your work, basically. If it's in your consciousness, bring that consciousness into your work. And that's what I think about all the time. And so yes, COVID was really horrible for young people, number one, and number two, for the climate crisis, because we had to, I mean, it was beautiful. The birds were so happy there were no more planes in the sky, but but it really was hard on momentum. And it gave an opening with the momentum of the conversation stopping for these alternative views to kind of start to try and, jump in and rewrite what's how it was being talked about. So that's steps back. But steps going forward, again, there's good news on the climate front, there's bad news on the climate front, and I think Gavin Schmidt's challenge remains. So I'm ancient, but it's still my, I'm older now, but it's still my goal to do it, to keep that conversation going. So that, because it's my passion, and this is how Theater Without Borders works, if you're passionate about it and Theater Without Borders is useful to help strengthen that conversation, and Theater Without Borders, just the name or the entity or the community, can help support what it is you're trying to accomplish, then let's do it. And that's how I feel about climate. So my goal is to keep Theater Without Borders going as long as I can do work towards climate.
Um, I guess I don't want to take too much of your time now. So I guess I just have one final question to wrap this up. And
Yes.
apart from the moments, events, and collaborations that we've already touched upon in this interview, with the long and storied history of Theaters Without Borders, have there been any specific moments, specific people, connections, or things that you and the organization have done that, for you personally, have been extremely impactful or extremely significant? I know this could be a very broad question because there's just so
Oh,
much.
yeah, there's just so much. I'm so grateful. I I wouldn't, Nix, it's a great question, and I would love to leave you with like a really pithy anecdote that you could use, as a writer to kind of wrap it up in a beautiful bow. Um, it is a hard one for me. If I think of one and I can actually send you an anecdote that I think encapsulates something, um, I I would tell you that uh I think I've witnessed so many powerful encounters. I've learned so much. I have so much admiration for so many of these colleagues that I've met. Um, it offered me things in my own life, experiences and relationships and opportunities that I couldn't have imagined. I think the most powerful, it, I don't want to speak for other people because I haven't, like interviewed them all to say, how was it for you? You are doing that, however. So you're collecting great anecdotes. Um, I told one to uh, Lucian, which, I have mixed feelings about it being the bow. Um, but I suppose in this day and time, it kind of has a lot of resonance for everybody. Um, I think the acting together on the world stage um, project overall was demanding and outrageously rewarding. We have this document that exists of theater artists all around the world, two-thirds of whom are the Theater Without Borders artists. Their work is documented. The fact that they were doing this work in Cambodia and in Myanmar and and in Argentina and in Serbia during the war, and just these remarkable stories. they're documented, they're thoughtfully considered. There's a documentary where you can see these artists talking about it. You can see how brave and courageous they were, how art meant something to them way beyond entertainment only, or way beyond um, uh, just a personal reflection, which is very meaningful. The American and British, but largely American theater tradition of the more family-centric psychological plays, it's beautiful. Based on others like Ibsen, and we're not the only ones, but we have developed it, Death of a Salesman kind of work. Um, uh, but seeing that work and seeing people on sides of conflict brought into a place of dialogue, it's so satisfying. It's so satisfying to believe that even for a moment, we as human beings um, can transcend our differences and meet as humans. This was the original idea of Theater Without Borders, that there would be a meeting place. Um, uh, I've witnessed it happen for others. And the anecdote I told Lucien is that we were all meeting at Brandeis, and I'm Jewish American, and Ida Nasrallah is Palestinian Israeli, and she was part of our little conference that visit. And she's a poet and a performance artist and a really amazing woman. And she reached out to me and said, let's go have dinner together. And we found a little corner of the dining hall area at Brandeis, just the two of us. And we closed the little door. And bless Ida, she is really a courageous person. And she said, what do you think about what's going on? And this was way before these past couple of years and all that has happened. And I said, Ida, I have relations who live in Israel. I have a cultural history with the place, but I'm I've never supported anything but equal rights for Palestinians since I was born in 1950, 2 years after the creation of the state. My whole life has been watching this evolution, which to my mind is tragic. I'm so sorry. And as I said, I'm so sorry. Tears burst out of my face and they burst out of her face. And we just sat there weeping together, holding hands over our plates, weeping. I don't know how else that happens, you know. Um, it's this kind of power that theater knows. We know we're theater people. We know the power of the person-to-person connection. We know that something alchemical, magical, mystical happens when humans are, okay, scientific, chemical happens when humans are in the same place. This is wonderful. Excuse me. I'm really happy to be having a Zoom with you. But wouldn't it be great to be in the same place and actually talking in the same space together in the same time? Because something more happens. We know that. We make theater. So it just proved how true that was. I mean, I'm sure we could both think of something that would make us both cry. And we could cry about it. But to have a moment of catharsis like that, where two people who carry, great sadness from opposite sides of a certain kind of divide, um, could be present with one another because we were both artists. We both wanted to be in that place. We both had that path. Sometimes I think theater artists, it could be anything. It could be Physicians Without Borders, and they would be crying together. It could be, tech web designers without borders, and they would be weeping together about something. There's plenty of mechanisms, but ours is particularly theater, and we have a profound, universal, fundamental respect and appreciation for the human to human contact. And we know how powerful it is. The power of identification, the power of mimetics, the mimetic response. When someone else is sad, you feel their sadness. Um, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a million examples like that, and I'll just share that one because that was a personal one for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That was really a beautiful anecdote, and I'm thankful you were able to share that moment with me. Um, Thank you so much for your time and for this meeting and for also just in general for all that you've done for theater internationally. I mean,
Um,
really being able to see that how impactful and incredible this conversation has been. Um, I suppose before we wrap this up, is there anything else you'd like to say?
no, I'm good. I'm good.
Perfect. Okay.
Said too
Well, I
much.
hope you have an amazing.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you, Nix. I want to thank you for your interest. And I so appreciate your approach. And I've enjoyed reading what you've been writing. And I appreciate your um, your presence. You're very present. You're intellectually and personally curious, and I can feel that. So I, I think that, if journalism is your future, I think those are beautiful gifts that, you just bring to the occasion, and they're very valuable because I'm aware of how I felt comfortable to speak about things, both with precision and care, but also from a place of uh, a deeper place of personal commitment. So I I I can appreciate your your talents as a journalist, both in as an interviewer and as a writer, and we so appreciate your enthusiasm and care and interest in this kind of work.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. That means a lot. Okay. I hope you have an amazing rest of the day, and I'll talk with you soon.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Say hi to Chantal.
Will do.
Okay.
Bye.